Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julia Stiglitz. I'm a partner at GSV Ventures, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel on online high schools. Have we reached a tipping point? Over the last 6 months, the education world has been turned upside down with 1.6 billion students all of a sudden learning online. Today, we're talking to some of the leaders of organizations and schools that already had an online presence, exploring how things have changed and whether we've reached a tipping point in online high schools. So I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel. We have Kevin Chavos, the president of K12.com, Megan Palevich, the head of schools for Laurel Springs School, Robert Paddock, the founder and CEO of Valentia Institute, Pete Rupert, the CEO of Fusion Academy, and Julie Young, the vice president and ASU Prep Digital High School. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So I'd like to start by hearing from each of you on how things have changed, both over the last few years, as well as the last 6 months when it comes to who the families are that are coming to your institution and why they're coming to your institution. So if we can go around and just briefly share a little bit about your institution. I think people will be interested in hearing actually the diversity of models, even though these are all online institutions. And then who are the families that are coming to you, and how has that changed? Maybe we can start with Megan.
Thanks, Julia. So I'm from Laurel Springs. We are the oldest online school in the United States. We've been around for 30 years this year. And typically we've been an asynchronous model forever. And so families come to us for flexibility, to be able to, have that rigorous school, but move on to other things, be it sports, acting, travel, whatever it is. In the past few years, I've seen a real mix shift, especially in the middle school. I think once school safety and bullying started to pop up a lot, we started to see that middle school burst a little bit. And now, of course, with COVID, what we're really seeing are those, private school families who don't really want to settle for the crisis schooling that's happening right now. So they want to go to the experts who have been doing it for a long time to have that consistency. It's really interesting. We have boomed, especially in the K-8 space, but again, in the high school as well.
Thanks. What about you, Kevin?
Well, I would agree with Megan. There's been an explosion based on the reality that the nation is facing with this epidemic. At K-12, where we happen to be the largest online education provider in the country, been in existence for 20 years. And in our ecosystem of schools and partner relationships, is several 100,000 students that we serve, either through providing curriculum to school districts or through running from soup to nuts entire programs with charter school partners or other school districts. Upwards of 6,000 to 7,000 teachers are with us at any given point in time in our ecosystem of schools. And when K-12 started 20 years ago, the main type of student was a homeschool student whose parent wanted to sort of lighten the load that they had to go through on a day-to-day basis. But as more and more states allow for the online option, full-time online option, we saw a change from more self-starter students, students who did have that homeschool experience, to more kids who were socially, academically, and economically at risk. So much so that last year, our first-time K-12 enrolled student, of that number, only 15% were at grade level. As Megan said, the largest demographic of students we're getting on our enrollment lines from parents were kids who were bullied. So we had so many kids with so many challenges, and I can tell you that the COVID pandemic did dramatically change the game. Our enrollment line calls, to give you an example, often consistent with us inquiring about how a student was doing academically, And there would always be some, hesitation and parents trying to explain the situation. When we asked that question, when our enrollment line started to explode during COVID, then, parents would say, oh, my child's doing fine academically. What's the name of the fifth grade teacher? I want to email them, as soon as we get off the line. So we had more of a surge of calls from parents who were looking for the best available option, as opposed to families that candidly were running from something. And I think that, the real challenge is going to be going forward is making sure that those of us who are doing this work do so in a way that recognizes the acute need to still meet kids where they are. That it's not going to be a one size fits all approach, especially since America now has a new vision of what online education can be.
Thanks, Kevin. Julie, what about you? You have and you're in online education, both from Florida Virtual Schools, where you were the founding CEO, and then now at ASU. How have you seen who the families are and who the students are? How has that changed over the time that you've been working in the space?
So a little bit of ditto here. 24 years ago when Florida Virtual Schools started, it started with a homeschool movement. And then it grew into a district movement, which then grew into the largest statewide public virtual school in the country. And always consistently for the 17 years that I was there, and I would say probably now as well, 25% of that enrollment was homeschool students. And then when we looked across the rest of the trajectory, a small amount were full-time students. Out of 350,000 students, there were probably 1,000, maybe 1,500 that were full-time students. And the other students were actually there to fill gaps or to accelerate or to find a way to have an opportunity to remediate and catch up. We did have a lot of actors, actresses, and athletes, people, students that wanted to pursue their dreams in a different way. That was a large percentage as well. And but for the most part, our students were both doing what we call traditional school and virtual school and blending their learning, and parents were making sure their kids got the right opportunities. So now, fast forward, literally 24 years later, when we started ASU Prep Digital 4 years ago, it was kind of similar to that, pretty kind of consistent when you were looking at your outreach and so forth. It was, you were thinking about the kids that needed you more than you needed them. Also, many of our kids who struggle and have learning differences but don't want to be labeled would come to us, and we would work with them as individual students in very, in a very personalized way, and we could see just incredible progress. So lo and behold, COVID hits, and I think it's been fascinating to watch the change and to watch how families have either adapted and or have just, kind of like, I can't do this. And the ones that have adapted, I think, have woken up and they've kind of gone, wow, I kind of like being involved in my child's education. And also, moving back to 20 years ago, families sacrificed to keep their kids at home. A lot of homeschool families, one of the parents chose not to work, and that was a sacrifice. What we're finding today is we have many families who are hiring tutors or who are creating these, name that term, homeschool collaboratives, learning pods, micro schools. They're just gathering kids together and going, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, and we'll use this content and these people will help us. And they're creating this learning environment for their children. And so I think that it is a different kind of a scenario where parents have taken a step back and they are engaging more deeply in their child's education. They're being invited in a different way, and they're recognizing more than ever that they have choices. They have choices whether they go to their local public school, and they're making those decisions based on what that school is doing with COVID. Are they going back in person? Are they staying home? Are they giving options for hybrid? Or they are really being selective about recognizing the learning environment for their children. So I think it's changed dramatically.
And Rob, you're the only one on the panel with a school based outside of the U.S. With a largely international student base right now. What are you seeing in terms of the families and students that are coming to you?
That's right, Julia. And it's wonderful to see the overlap in terms of the sorts of student personas and demographics and so on of those students who were coming to us pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I would say that it is, and maybe just a little bit of background, the Valencia Institute is a global private online high school offering a socially rich and what we call a high-touch approach to online education. So the students are immediately put into small tutorial groups. There's a very high degree of support from their teachers, from their dedicated mentors, technical support officers, large focus on small tutor group learning, challenge-based curriculum, and so on. And what we're seeing post-COVID, and this is very similar to my fellow panelists, a lot of parents now who would have, and students who have come from the mainstream are now looking at online schooling and wanting to go to a purpose-built online school to get a quality online schooling. And this is certainly not to detract from the heroic efforts of the many teachers and the many schools who have had to make this radical shift from residential education to online education in a record amount of time. But I think that as this pandemic has progressed and the longer these students have remained in a system that has not necessarily been purpose-built, they're starting to think, well, what could the other options be? And they're certainly looking around for a purpose-built, high-quality offering. In addition, I guess one other thing that we've seen, we've launched a series of what we call boutique campuses, where students are studying entirely online, but they are actually locating themselves in a physical space every single day. These are converted guest houses, old office spaces, and so on. They look very, very much like a co-working space. And students are completing all of their studies online from these spaces, but the role of the mentor is then physically present on site. And we're seeing that there is a strong pull towards these boutique campus offerings as well. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, just the nature of them being more small and intimate in nature, the opportunity for cross-infection and so on is radically reduced. But I think as time goes on, for a lot of parents who have been used to the traditional education system, they still would like to drop their kids off at a safe space every single day and that they can go to work and so on. So I think there's some very interesting trends emerging, and it's very interesting to see just how consistent the student personas are across the States, and certainly in our experience in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia.
Thanks, Rob. And Pete, your network of schools was largely offline. You launched an online school more recently, pre-COVID. Talk a little bit about the decision to launch that online school, and then how the role that it plays within your network going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And it's funny, first I'll just talk about the COVID impact. And I think one of the greatest silver linings out of the whole COVID situation has been the forced consumerism of parents today as they make education choices. In the old days, parents could move into a nice school district in a good zip code with good schools and pretty much send their kid to kindergarten and hopefully see them graduate 13 years later with a good high school degree and ready for college and ready for success. And parents who had the wherewithal to move into the nicer districts benefited, et cetera. And then we had the charter school movement and attempts to kind of education reform in several areas in the last number of years. But in one fell swoop, we have completely changed the game for parents. And as I think they saw their traditional schools try mightily to adjust to what had happened and go online and still try and teach 20 or 25 or 30 kids in a classroom at the same time. It's just an extremely challenging situation, like Robert mentioned. And so now they've had this idea, many people have never even thought about, would I ever educate my kid online? Or think about a virtual school. It was always for someone else, and a small minority of families would ever consider doing that. And then all of a sudden, you have all kinds of options. I think that consumerism that has bloomed through this process is just great wind in the sails for all online schools here and elsewhere that are providing that opportunity for more personalization, more customization for families, and allowing them to benefit from a variety of different ways. And so, as it related to us, we saw that in our school model, which we have about 77 campuses of one-to-one instruction, small schools, 60 to 100 students typically, that service 6th through 12th graders, and all of our classes were taught one teacher, one student. And one of the challenges we had is because we're tuition-based and you can imagine an expensive proposition for many families, it's hard for us to go to every town across the country. And so we really foresaw that the opportunity to open a virtual school, providing that same kind of personalized one-to-one instruction with a lot of mentoring from the teacher, a synchronous type of environment where the student is in front of their teacher all day long, or their different teachers all day long, can be a really powerful investment. And so we're fortunate enough to have been working on this for the past year to prepare to launch our Fusion Global Academy. And we officially just launched it back in August, but we did kind of do a soft start and rush to kind of get it open so that families across the country who couldn't attend one of our schools locally, even virtually at that time, could at least find us throughout the country or even internationally. So we're just a few months into our new launch, but we're seeing how much interest there is, how much families are really concerned about, can their son or daughter be successful in traditional education when it's hybrid or when it's still all 100% virtual. And so it's just great to be able to provide an option, but we're one of lots and lots of different options out there that are available for families. And the fact that it's much more known, much more accepted now, it's just going to be great for the future of education and frankly for kids in this country.
Thanks, Pete. Pete, one of the things you hit on was the role of the teacher and how the role of the teacher shifts or doesn't shift. And in your case, it moved sort of seamlessly from this one-on-one offline to this one-on-one online. A lot of kids and teachers out there are finding that the sort of traditional classroom move to Zoom is not working that smoothly. So I'm curious, in an online environment, a purpose-built, as Rob said, online environment, how does the role of the teacher change? And how does that change who you hire and how you train? And maybe we can start with Megan or Kevin, and then go from there.
So I'll start. Thanks, Kevin. So it's really interesting. My prior life, I was brick and mortar teacher administrator in independent private schools. And so when I came to this space, it was, how do you learn what type of teacher you need to hire? And it is a very different type of teacher. The bag of tricks, especially with an asynchronous model, is completely different than the bag of tricks of a teacher dealing with classroom management and all of that. And so what happens is the student and teacher have this relationship. They are one-to-one. With rolling admissions, they are meeting that student right where they are, and it's really powerful. I remember our first graduation, I literally was sobbing, crying, because I couldn't believe the relationship that the teachers built with the students, because it's a much more intimate setting. The teacher can then spend time and give real authentic feedback. They can do that in video, in audio, written, and it becomes much more rich for the student instead of getting, a smiley face and 100%. And I think that's kind of the difference that teachers are experiencing right now. They're so used to those quick formative assessments that happen in the classroom that you can kind of give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or, look over their shoulder and say, hey, great job, where it's very purposeful, and suddenly your communication has to change. And all the things that you used for formative assessment have to look a little bit different. And it's a really hard job. And so when hiring teachers, you have to put them through that process. Give them some student work. How would they react? What kind of feedback would they give? How do they come across in their written communication? How do they come across in webcam communication? So it's been really interesting. We've developed a whole mentor teacher program, which has been really successful. But I can imagine it's very difficult for teachers put in this situation on the other side in the brick and mortar.
Yeah, I'll try not to repeat what Megan said. This is where the intersection of great teaching in an online setting really meets squarely with the future of education. We partnered with Southern Hampshire University to create the first of its kind master's in virtual education teaching, based on research. It was research-based, based on the efficacy associated with them looking at hundreds of hours of tapes of some of our really high-performing teachers and some of our most challenged teachers. And I think Megan is right. You know, this is not for every teacher because at the core of great teaching and student interaction is, you know, student engagement and that relationship. And teachers have to be able to develop that engagement in an online setting, and it's not the same. And working with Southern New Hampshire University, where we have a profile for what an effective teacher looks like in an online setting, and taking that further, we've developed what I think is the best teacher training program in the country for teachers who are trying to migrate from from a brick and mortar setting to an online setting. And it is quite different. I think that the future of education, which everyone talks about the personalization, the flexibility and the like, but the future that we're going to be facing is understanding that teachers will not be the end-all be-all content deliverers. They will be the guides. They will be challenging the students in the virtual classrooms tomorrow to consider what problems do you want to solve. They will engage in project-based learning, more project-based learning approaches where students can learn how to work with their peers to solve some of these problems. And it will be more of a experience where students feel empowered as opposed to sitting in a traditional classroom, being still, don't move, being lectured to for 40 minutes, regurgitated back in a couple weeks and forget it a week after that. This is going to be a more dynamic, interactive relationship between teacher, student, and parents. And I think that the best of us who do this, and we all have challenges, are able to already, you know, tease out what the future will look like in this regard.
Thanks, Kevin. Rob, you know, something you've talked about is the sort of disaggregation of the role of the teacher and breaking it up into different parts. And that's sort of how you've built Valenture. Can you talk about what those different parts are?
Yeah, absolutely, Julia. I think that at least a fundamental diagnosis from my perspective is that we, in the brick and mortar environment, we actually ask way too much of our teachers. We ask them to perform too many jobs simultaneously well and hope that they're going to meet their respective KPIs, if indeed those exist at all, across multiple dimensions. I mean, just very briefly, as a teacher, you need to be a subject matter expert, you need to be a curriculum designer and developer, you need to be a lesson facilitator, you need to be a marker, you need to be an administrator, you are a confidant, a mentor, a social worker, a sports coach on the side, and the list just goes on and on. And truly, by my estimation, that's just a completely unreasonable job description. From our perspective, if we're thinking about how to scale quality education, and you know, this one might consider this too much of a commercially orientated mindset, but if one considers how to scale quality education, one needs to think about how one might break those multiple functions down into their component parts, put experts in every single one of those fields, and then I think the real opportunity is to use data and specifically learning analytics to make sure that every single stakeholder who is angling in to support those students has a single view of that student and their overarching performance. So to give you a very quick sense, we have a completely separate team that deals with curriculum development. That's learning designers, graphic designers, animators, e-learning authors, video producers, working together with deep-seated subject matter experts to create this rich and engaging content. There's a totally separate team of teachers, which then, to Megan's point, these are very specifically chosen for their ability to facilitate learning. They have the warm, bubbly personalities. They are able to forge the sense of connection, albeit in the virtual space. There's a totally separate team then of what we call mentors. These are individuals who come from a counseling and psychology background. Their sole role is to keep those learners on track and to help them with their psychosocial and their social-emotional development as they progress through their studies. Separate team for technical support and so on. And really what wraps all of that together and what allows us to continuously have the single view of the student is learning analytics. And I believe, at least from my perspective, that's the real frontier and the real value proposition of online education moving forward.
Thanks, Rob. Socialization and sort of friendships are one of the things that I think many parents have concerns about when they think about moving their students, their kids to an online environment. I'm curious how you meet those needs in an online setting. Julie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so at ASU Prep Digital, we believe we are high touch and high tech. And so we think about the high touch a great deal. And our model is very similar, Rob, in that we have, you know, our team that does the content development. We have our team that does the IT. Our teachers do the teaching. And then we also have a learning success coach, which does exactly what the name subscribes to. And the learning success coach deals with all the, you know, we call teenage drama and trauma, although we're now K-12, and then also helps with, you know, college preparation, as well as just being that person that is always in that child's life and follows that child through their entire career while they are with us, if they are with us full time. So what our learning success coaches also do is they spend a great deal of time on social emotional issues for the students, and what's it look like to actually create that high touch environment, not just between teacher and student, which is all very personal, but also between student and student, also creating an environment for parents to have a forum together where they have collegiality as parents. But with the students, it's funny you asked this question, because 3 weeks ago, I just sent out a note to all staff and said, send me, you know, tell me what you're doing to socialize your kids online, because we have our brick and mortar schools, and then we have our digital school, and so we're spending a lot of time training our brick and mortar teachers in the digital aspects. And the ideas that they're coming up with are awesome, but we do online recess. We actually do game night. We have choral activities where kids come together and they blend and join musically together. We have different competitions. When COVID was not a factor, we also, in the Arizona area, would bring kids together face to face, probably every 6 weeks for a field trip opportunity, you know, in different places around the state. And if, you know, whichever teacher that might live in that area would facilitate that effort for us. It also is built into the content. You know, we talk about, when we're talking about teachers and the role of the teachers, and we think about in the US that half of our teachers leave the profession within 5 years, that's really sad. And so what is it about this profession now that we all decided to go into? For me, it was 40 years ago, and I couldn't, you know, I loved being a teacher. And you know, what have we done to where we're, you know, people are leaving by the droves? And so we're very focused too on how do we create content, systems, and infrastructure that supports the teacher and works for the teacher, so that the teacher can do what they do extremely well, which is interact with students and create those different environments. And so as we develop content, not only is it adaptive and very engaging in nature, but it also is designed to push kids away from the computer and towards each other. So not only do we do live lessons with our students from our teachers, but we find ways for the kids to work together. You know, I think about Zoom today and what we would have killed to have had Zoom 20 years ago. And then I think about how we're somewhat misusing it today by putting kids in front of a Zoom screen all day long. But I think that used properly has given us just a whole, you know, blue ocean as to how in a digital, virtual online environment that we can connect kids in a way that they can create friendships and collaborate in real time, and, you know, work together in real time. And so it gets me really excited to think about how, if we make the effort, that we can create environments for kids to engage with each other and become social beings in this online world with guidance.
Kevin, how do you think about the social environment of high schools, and how you facilitate that in an online environment?
Well, we have come to understand, just based on exit surveys over the years, that one of the main reasons why families leave a full-time virtual environment is the socialization aspect. So, you know, we put the charge out a few years back to our school leaders. What is the thing that keeps most parents and even their children's children going to the same school, the same brick and mortar school? It is that that feeling of being part of something, being part of a local school community. So we said, let's build a local school community at all of our virtual schools. And we've begun to do that. I mean, we have school events, we have National Honor Society, we have virtual clubs, esports is just taken off. We've got 16 of our schools involved in esports programs. It's not real football, but they love it and they're good at it. And we've got skating events, we've got face-to-face events where they do bowling and trips to the aquarium in some of our schools. Our California schools has Community Day. We have cooking and coding classes, Minecraft clubs, and we have science fairs, debate teams, graduation proms, everything that the brick and mortar schools offer. We're urging our schools to do the same. In fact, you know, Julie, we have a school in Arizona as well, and we had so many parents and students signing up for the science fair that the state wanted to limit the number that each school could have of kids who participate. So this idea of making sure that we look at what excites children and what does building a local school community look like in the brick and mortar setting, do what you can to replicate that in a way that's safe and nurturing and holistic, similar to what you get in the brick and mortar environment.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. So I'd love for this panel to help us imagine like what these schools of the future look like, and what is some of the innovation that's possible in an online environment that would not be possible in a traditional setting, either that you're working on or that is something that you want to see in the future. I think, you know, often when we talk about online education, it's sort of operating from a sort of deficit perspective where it's this sort of, you know, lesser alternative to a traditional setting, but one that you need to do for X, Y, and Z. There's also all sorts of exciting opportunities that technology and online opens up. So I want to hear about, you know, what are those types of opportunities that either that you're working on now or that you see on the horizon that you're excited about. Maybe we can start with Megan.
Awesome. So I am very excited to talk about this because as an institution who's been solely asynchronous for a very long time, we have had to pivot to meet this new family that's coming to us. And so luckily last year we happened to partner with Minerva to offer some dual enrollment courses. And we were very excited about the technology that they had to offer. Fast forward to June, where Ben Nelson says, hey, let's do something different. Let's start the Minerva Baccalaureate. Let's think about AP differently, IB differently. Let's create the new standard of online high school. And so we have the first cohort of Minerva Baccalaureate, which I believe is going to change the future of not only online, but brick and mortar schools. Because really what happens is you take the core courses and they meet live for 2 hours a day. And then you have in a brick and mortar 6 periods a day that you could play with. You know, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to have maker spaces? Are you going to have virtual internships? In our instance of it, these students are working asynchronously, but then they come into this active learning forum where they are learning based on learning objectives and the science of learning and having a really deep social and emotional course, having a quantitative reasoning courses, things that you don't normally have time for during the school day. So I am excited to see how these schools are going to take this idea of hybrid and technology and how they're going to pivot. Because guess what? These parents that are coming to us right now did not come to us for flexibility. They are now realizing the benefits of flexibility and they're thinking, hey, we could be at the beach doing work. We could do this. And now they have this new affection for flexibility because guess what? They have flexibility at work now. They never had that. So wouldn't they want that flexibility for their child? And so I think that is what's going to start moving the needle a little bit further for brick and mortars and even for online schools.
Thanks, Megan. Pete? What are some new opportunities that you're seeing? You know, for the past year, you've had this online environment. What are some new things that experience is opening up, new innovation?
Well, one of the things that everyone's talked about today is this idea of personalization and how important it is. And I think what technology and online learning allows is for all kinds of ways that we can better personalize learning, even within or in partnership with a traditional brick and mortar type school. And so one is, I think you'll see a tremendous amount of hybrid type of models or hybrid type of programs for students in any school where there's a mix of modalities that they can choose to better personalize their individual educational experience. And so what we envision is the ability to leverage the synchronous and asynchronous opportunities so that a student who is just a master in a subject and is just accelerating has the opportunity to just work independently online in an asynchronous kind of environment and just go, go, go. But who may be struggling in another subject may have the opportunity for a completely synchronous, high touch, more detailed teaching and learning environment with an individual teacher in order for them to master the material at a more rapid rate by getting all that attention. And so many kids are great in some subjects and not so great in the others. And so you allow for that personalization, that multimodality that happens. And I think the other thing, and Megan hit on this a little bit, is the opportunity for the mentoring and teachers to really be able to do more than just teach because of that flexibility, because of the way we can use technology. It's just so absolutely critical that we have a lot more mentoring going on, especially in our middle school and high school years for kids, because so many of them are struggling social, emotionally with everything that we read about society today and all the concerns. Wow, wouldn't it be great when we can leverage all these different modalities to better help kids succeed in those years, not just academically, but socially and emotionally as well. So it's really exciting to think about what this whole movement has done and how it's just starting to mushroom now. And I'm excited about the opportunities in the future to see all of these different ways students can learn, leveraging the technology and the flexibility and the new way that we think about educating kids.
Thanks, Pete. Rob, what about you? What innovation are you excited about that online learning opens up?
So I think two things that I'll mention, Julia. The first one being learning analytics. I know I've mentioned this before. I truly believe that the ability to have the right information, real-time data that relates to individual progress of students as they progress hour by hour, day by day, week by week, at the fingertips of those individuals who are responsible for supporting them, be it the mentors, be it the teachers, be it the technical support staff, and so on, is absolutely critical. And I think that it's enabling us to be able to plan and orientate our remediation, our support strategies in a way that we just never could have conceptualized before. In addition to that, from a management perspective, one of the abilities that learning analytics gives you is also to track and monitor the individual activity of your staff, of the teachers on the front line, of the mentors. And if, as an example, there's an SLA where if a student is submitting an assignment on a Wednesday and the teacher is expected to mark that and provide rich feedback and respond to them on the Friday, we from a management perspective can track and monitor that. And again, I think from the fundamental question of how do we scale quality, learning analytics is an incredibly exciting enabler for that. The second piece, as it relates to what I think this new modality of learning is enabling, is the ability for students from radically different cultures, from different parts of the world, to effectively be learning together and to be collaborating. These students are entering a globalized economy. They are going to be working with individuals in the future from other parts of the world in an online context. And by my estimation, the sooner we can start to help our students develop those skills, develop the understanding of the cultural nuances, the ability to effectively collaborate and run projects in a virtual environment and so on, they are going to be better enabled for the future world of work. And for me, that's a really exciting thing that we uniquely can enable in this online school domain.
Great. And Julia, do you want to add on in terms of innovation that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I do. ASU is the largest university in the country, and it is has been named the most innovative university in the country for 6 years running now. And one of the reasons I'm there is because of President Crow's vision, which is, he is a first generation graduate, and he is incredibly focused on creating a community where a college going culture for all students, literally worldwide. And so when, people often ask, why does the university have K-12 schools? Because we're embedded as a part of the university. We don't sit beside it or borrow its name. We are part of ASU. And he will tell you, he didn't get into the charter school business to get into the charter school business. He got into it to get into the K-12 business, to build a continuum of learning where kids could advance when they were ready without the barriers, the arbitrary barriers that we put in place called elementary, middle, high school, and college. And so ASU Prep Digital not only encourages kids to start college in high school, but we pave the way for them with a significant reduction in price. And then we work with them to identify, students that appear to be capable or are very interested in learning, and we encourage them to think about going ahead and starting their college career in high school. We have 12 and 13-year-olds that are taking ASU college courses. These are kids that probably would be dropouts if they weren't, because they were so incredibly bored with their school. So we've seen tremendous growth in this opportunity. So we have students who are combining their high school with their college. They're not focused on getting an associate's degree. That's not our goal. Our goal is actually to get them into a major by the time they're a junior, certainly by the beginning of their senior year. They're not tied to it. But they can we actually map it out for them. If you have an interest in electrical engineer, let us show you the courses you need to take 9, 10, 11, and 12 that will give you a taste and let you test drive that major while you're still in high school. And that learning success coach works with the student and the university and the parent to pull it all together on behalf of the student. And so that is something that would be very difficult if all tied to brick and mortar, because the parent would have to transport, the student would have to go to a different school. Very, very difficult. And so, but we're able to offer those kind of opportunities to kids all over the world. And we're also doing an exchange program with Morocco. And so kids, think about that as well. Think about, now it's the cool thing for kids to go abroad and study, but that requires parents who have money and means to send their kids on those kinds of trips. But we're setting up opportunities for our kids to do those kinds of things virtually. And so they all get that kind of an experience if indeed they want it. That again is an innovation that I think is creating some equity that otherwise is not there.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you all of you for joining today. We could go on and on. I have lots of other questions. It's, this is, you all are leading the way in terms of what quality online high school education looks like. And students all over the world are experiencing that right now. And it's exciting to learn from some of the innovators in this space on what it does look like when it's done well, and what it could look like as we head into the future. So thank you all for being here today.